You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, so Houston is presently kind of AD-less. They fired Chris Pesman earlier this summer, and then there's a report later that he's going to be kind of working at home, from home while they're finishing their search and finding someone. I can't remember off the top of my head actually if it was through mid-August or late August or whatever, but theoretically, right, he was going to do some dotting of I's and crossing of T's until they had someone to replace him, but he was told he was fired in June, right? And the first name on most people's who's going to replace Chris Pesman list was Jeremiah Dicky of Boise State. Now, Jeremiah Dicky came to Houston many years ago to work with Mack Rhoades, right? Obviously, people go their separate ways. He's been a successful AD at Boise State. At Boise State, he helped launch different NIL programs and initiatives, player education on how to use that NIL money as well, really grown their NIL program for a group of five school to a very respectable level, while also navigating a couple different coaching changes and things like that. His resume at Boise State was very, very strong, right? The other piece of this is that he made sense because he understood Houston. He was involved in raising a lot of money when he was at the University of Houston. He was at Houston for some, I would say, fairly successful hires, even if they got poached by people later. I think he made a lot of sense and checked a lot of boxes and was a lot of people's whole shot for getting the AD job. He just was. And then very suddenly, his name dropped off the list. People stopped talking about him. Duarte reported, I forget if it was in a podcast or in a written article for the Chronicle. I remember Duarte being first on, though, to say Jeremiah Dickey hadn't even really been contacted by the University of Houston a couple weeks into the search. And everyone started saying, wait a second, I thought this was a very real candidate. And people were confused, whether it's if you're on different message boards, social media sites, there are people kind of think, I thought this guy was our guy, and we're not even talking to him. And, everyone, I think, was balking at the idea that somehow that was Houston messing up, or so they all thought that, like, wait, Houston must have messed this up. There's no way they're not talking to the guy or whatever. And as recently as Wednesday, Jeremiah Dickey has now signed a massive contract extension with Boise State through the summer of 2029 that makes him one of the highest paid group of five ADs in the country. And I'm here to tell you, it feels a lot like Houston got kind of played. I don't know who leaked out early on that Jeremiah Dickey was the candidate. I can tell you right now, a lot of legitimate reporting was done to say it after the fact, right? He makes a lot of sense on paper. And it feels like it turned into a lot of money in Jeremiah Dickey's pocket. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm not saying I hate the player or hate the game. I am saying, though, that Houston, it doesn't seem like ever contacted him, but the national perception was they were. And since the national perception was they were, perception can become reality and help negotiate a fat extension for Jeremiah Dickey. Now, again, don't hate the player of the game. That's the way these things go. Use the media to your advantage. Get it. I thought there were lots of perks to having Jeremiah Dickey on campus. I even think I talked about in 2 or 3 podcast episodes about like how he could be a great fit, right? But truthfully, I think ultimately it's Jeremiah Dickey's loss, right? Now, I don't know if Houston ever contacted him on an under-the-table kind of way. I talked to 1 or 2 people that said he'd kind of stopped responding to some of the Houston donor texts and stuff like that, and I feel like that meant that he was in a negotiation or something. I don't know if that means anything, right? I do think, though, that if Jeremiah Dickey really did have any contact with Houston and just didn't get reported or isn't being reported accurately, and he turned it down to get an extension of Boise State, that's his loss. He's missing the boat here because Power 4 football, Power 4 sports is separating more and more from the group of five every single week. Not every month, not every year, every single week. These things are separating more and more. And while he's doing very well at Boise State, the more they separate, the more that experience is going to be kind of all for naught because it's not going to be anything like what the job would be at a Power 4 institution, right? I don't know when his next chance to make that jump would be. I'd imagine it's summer of 2028 with a contract running on 2029. But ultimately, Houston was a place that would have welcomed him back with open arms because it's welcoming him back, right? Now, I still really like, of the people I've done extensive research on, Kelly Zinn, the LSU executive AD. LSU's been very successful across the board in the sport that she's in the sports that they compete in the SEC while she's been there. 3 different national titles while she's been on campus. Revenue's up 21% in her 2 years there. Built a whole relationship-based NIL program called NILSU. Different content kind of based initiatives where the players get to really control their stories and they can be as involved or not involved in that as they desire. Because some kids, you got to remember, this NIL thing is not as big as deal to as it is others. So it's really kind of a whatever kids want to get out of it, they can. It's a really cool program. She could bring that kind of experience to Houston. She had extensive time at West Virginia, a Big 12 school. She helped navigate getting into that conference. So she's seen what it's like to be new to the Big 12. She was also the interim AD at West Virginia, so she's been an interim AD, so an AD at the Big 12. She's been at the Big 12 tables. I like her a lot. And I say this to endorse her. I don't have any reporting saying anything outside of the fact that I think she'd be a great candidate. I understand the LSU job is a lot different. LSU makes a lot more money, a lot more cash coming into LSU, and navigating funds. A lot of people would say, well, of course, it's easy to spend money well when you're LSU. You got a lot of money, right? I would just say that I think that she's started some very cool things there, and Jeremiah Dickey seems to be unavailable. I like Kelly Zinn a lot. As we get closer to that first football game, I feel like we're going to hear more and more about this, including a decision. Now, Kelly Zinn is just, after researching a handful of names who I like right now, I want to know who you like right now. So tell me in the comments down below. I know you got some thoughts and opinions. Everyone does. If there's a name I'm missing, let me know. Again, I don't not talk to Kelly, not talk to people in Couture's office, not talk to big money donors about who they're putting their money behind. I just think she'd be really darn good at it. Now, if you want to hear more about the Big 12 and this potential expansion, what all's going on, any of that, Locked On Big 12 needs to be your second listen of the day. So go check out Drake Toll and them over there. They're doing a great job of covering everything about the Big 12, preseason polls, who's in, who's out, all the things. Make sure you go check them out at Locked On Big 12. Locked On Coogs is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team, our Houston Cougars, each and every day. Go Cougs.